First of all, thank you so much, John, for suggesting me as a speaker here. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you to all of you for being here. So as you know, my name's Vicki Burns, and I'll just, okay, it's already, is that magic or what?
The magic of Rotary is the theme this year.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking to you about the industrial style of hog farming and how that's connected to the state of Lake Winnipeg. And by industrial style, I want to make sure that you understand I'm not talking about the family farms. We still have a few of those where they are raising perhaps a few hundred pigs along with other animals and other crops, and they're doing it in a way that we really support, and we really hope we can encourage more of that. But what I'm going to talk to you about the basics of the industrial style of hog farming, because I'm sure lots of you don't have any idea what that's all about. Then the basics of blue-green algae, which is one of the big problems affecting Lake Winnipeg and some of our other lakes. And why do we think the two are connected? And finally, and most importantly, what can we do about it? Because we can change it. I want you all to understand this isn't the way that we have to stick. There's really good ways that we can change this, and I hope that by the time I'm done, you'll understand what those are. So first of all, Manitoba has the distinction of being the most intense hog industry anywhere in Canada, and by that I mean the most number of pigs per farm site. We have almost 6,000 average per farm site compared to across the country only about 2,000. That's a lot of pigs in a small area. And why is that a problem? It's basically because pigs are just like us. They have to pee and poop, and where does all that go? And 6,000 together, that's a lot of manure in a small space. I'm going to be talking more about that in a minute. So just to give you a sense of how the pigs in the industrial style barns are looked after, they're very, very intensely confined. In the top photo, you'll see the mother pigs, we call them sows, from the age of about 6 months when they can first get pregnant and have their first litter, until essentially when they're around 2 years old and they're pulled from the herd to be culled. They have to live in those stalls. Those stalls are about 2 feet by 7 feet. The animals can take a step forward and back. They can't even turn around. They're not getting out to move around at all. So that's one of the most incredible confinement of any animals in agriculture. The other pigs are in these pens that you can see in the lower picture. They're raised in buildings that have slotted floors, so their urine and their feces falls through those slots into a pit under the barn, and then about once a week that pit is flushed out into a lagoon that's just not too far away from the barn. And the problem with that is, first of all, there's no straw for the pigs to root in, and pigs instinctually, they have these big snouts, you can see them. They were just driven to root around on the ground for food. There's a tremendous sense of smell they have. When they're in these barns, they can't do any of that. There's nothing for them to root in. In fact, the toxic gases that come back up from the manure pits are so powerful that if the big fans, the ventilation in the barns, if the power goes off and the backup generator doesn't work, those animals all suffocate to death within a couple of hours. That's definitely happened several times in the last 5 years, where you'll have 3,000 to 5,000 pigs just, they're gone in a couple of hours. And actually, when the fans are working, those toxic gases are blown out into the neighboring community. And if you live within a kilometer or a kilometer and a half of those barns, it's really bad smell. It's not just a nuisance. We've discovered there's lots more research now that shows that it really is bad for people to have to smell those kind of smells. It depends what kind of direction the wind is going, but I mean, that's another big problem for humans. Anyway, so I first got interested in this whole thing because I was the executive director at the Winnipeg Humane Society, and it's kind of amazing. Within about 6 months, people started phoning me and saying, do you know how pigs are kept? Do you know how mother pigs are kept? And I had no idea. I mean, I love cats and dogs, but I really had no idea about any other animals. And I thought, well, you know, I was so naive then, because that was actually over 30 years ago. I thought, if I start telling people, it's going to change, I'm sure, because, you know, most people don't want to see animals suffering. So I've been talking about it for 30 years. not as much as, there was a period there where I was a little more quiet, but now I'm back to really talking about it. So my interest in this started with the treatment of the animals, because really in these industrial barns, it's inhumane. We should not be keeping animals this way at all for their entire life. But beyond that, then I began to realize the tremendous environmental implications, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about a little more here. Now, actually, I understand I'm only supposed to talk for 20 minutes, right? Okay, could you perhaps give me a little signal when I'm about 3 minutes away from the, because thank you. So, what happens when you have all these pigs is, you have to do something with their manure. You can't just send it to the garbage dump or whatever, or flush it down to go to the water treatment. No, it's treated as a fertilizer. I mean, it's not treated, it's used as a fertilizer. So it's applied to land, and whatever is going to grow on that land uses up a lot of the phosphorus and nitrogen that's in that manure. And phosphorus and nitrogen is very important for anything that grows. Humans need it, animals need it, plants need it. So it's not bad that this is used as a fertilizer. The problem is when there's too much of it and they can't spread it around enough. So there's two things I want you to know for sure out of this is, in Manitoba, we have a regulation that states that producers are allowed to put 5 times as much manure on one section of land as what any crop can use in 1 year, as long as they promise that they won't reapply it to that land for another 5 years. But the big problem with that is we know that the phosphorus and nitrogen that's in that manure, even when it's injected, it does not just sit there waiting for 5 years. In the spring, when the snow melts, some of it can leach out of the soil and get run into ditches and creeks and so on. In floods, actually I'm going to go to the next slide and just show you this. This is a flood of 2022 where a lot of southern Manitoba was underwater like that for weeks. During floods, the phosphorus and nitrogen is pulled off and gets into the water. And during big rainstorms, and with climate change, we're having more of those very, very heavy rainstorms where the soil just cannot absorb as much. So that's the first thing, that regulation, keep that in your head, that they're allowed to apply 5 times as much. We'll just go back and make another really important point, I think, and that is, back in 2007, the Clean Environment Commission here in Manitoba did a report about the sustainability of the hog industry in Manitoba, because it had been about maybe 10 to 15 years since the industry really had grown, and so the Clean Environment Commission did this report. One of the things they recommended was that within 5 years of that, so in other words, by 2012, there was supposed to be another review and assessment of the regulation related to the spreading of manure to see, is this really sustainable? What is happening with the phosphorus and nitrogen? So that was back in 2012. That review has never been done. And that's why at Hogwatch, We are trying to say, look, we've got to take seriously what's going on here and consider changing things before it goes too much further. The result of all the phosphorus and nitrogen getting into our streams and so on is it feeds the blue-green algae. Actually, do any of you have cottages on Lake Winnipeg? Or do any have cottages on any lakes that are suffering from blue-green algae? Okay. Has anybody actually ever seen blue-green algae? Okay, good. Because it isn't just Lake Winnipeg. We have Killarney Lake, Pelican Lake. There are several other lakes that are also suffering from this. I've just got a couple more pictures of what blue-green algae is all about, but this is kind of an interesting one. This is a satellite image, in other words, taken from satellites that are going around that NASA puts up, and they take pictures, and when it's not very cloudy, we can see this really high up image of Lake Winnipeg. This is Lake Winnipeg. This is the North Basin, and here's the South Basin. And the bright green here, that's the blue-green algae bloom. So you can see, and that actually isn't as bad as you sometimes it's really, it covers almost the entire lake. And so it's a big issue. Way back in, I think 2013 or something, there was a European environmental group that decided to designate Lake Winnipeg that year as one of the most threatened lakes in the world. It wasn't the only one, but that's very significant. I just wanted to show you, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, what it looks like. It can look like a whole bunch of different things, but this is from a year or two ago at Victoria Beach. Unfortunately, Victoria Beach often sees these blooms. One of the distinctive features, and it doesn't show up in this color too well, but sometimes it looks like a can of turquoise paint has been spread on the water. So, I actually, when I was a kid, we had a cottage on Lake Winnipeg for many years. It was in my family for 50 years. And we used to get a lot of algae in those days, but it was not blue-green algae. In those days, there's a whole bunch of different species of algae, and lots of them are not toxin. They're toxic. They're kind of annoying, because sometimes it was like going in pea soup. But it's not the blue-green algae. Now the blue-green algae makes up about 95% of the algae that hits the lake. It's really taken over. And why is that a problem? Well, because there are very serious, I've only put a slide up here about the human health impacts. I haven't mentioned it. I mean, it can be very damaging for fish. Sometimes there are fish kills. For dogs, actually, if you ever have a dog and you're near the lake with has blue-green algae, don't let them go in the water. Every year there are dogs that die. The problem is, they go in. We wouldn't go in. You probably wouldn't go in. You'd be smart enough to know you don't want to go in that. But dogs don't necessarily think that way, and they lick themselves so much, and there's no treatment. I mean, they'll be dead within a few hours. So I'm not going to read the list, but there's a lot of potential serious human health impacts, including at the bottom, affecting neurotoxins, or that there are neurotoxins that can possibly affect your brain function. And we do have something called BMAA that Dr. Eva Pip discovered in certain areas of Lake Winnipeg, and that's thought to contribute to diseases like ALS and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. So there isn't very much talk about this here in Manitoba, but in other areas of the world where there's a lot of blue-green algae, there's way more attention being paid to that. So, now just to give you an indication of aside from the number of pigs that we're raising every year, I think these two graphs are really important. This one shows the amount of phosphorus that gets deposited in Lake Winnipeg every year. It goes way back to 1920. It's kind of amazing. They can take a core sample from the bottom of the lake and they can measure how much phosphorus and nitrogen was deposited in that year in the lake. I find it quite fascinating. Anyway, from 1920 up to about 1970, it was pretty much the same every year. And then in 1970, that was after Manitoba Hydro started regulating the lake, and I know there are some concerns about that. It cracked up a little bit, but look, this is 1990, and look at how much, this on the bottom is the amount. It almost tripled in the 1990s. At the same time, the number of pigs being produced in Manitoba, this goes back to 1936. Up until about 1985 or 90, there was a little bit of growth, but not very much. But look what happens in 1990. We went from producing 2 million pigs a year to 8 or 9 million pigs a year. So if you flip those graphs, you'll see that they kind of match. Now, I want to make it very clear that the phosphorus and nitrogen that are a problem for blue-green algae, it does not all come from the hog industry. Absolutely, human sewage, the city's sewage treatment, all the little town sewage treatment, that's very important. That all needs to be treated. But we can't deny that this is a really big problem. Scientists or researchers who work for the Manitoba government did a pie chart of how much, where does the phosphorus and nitrogen come from. And in Manitoba, about, actually, the 50% of the phosphorus and nitrogen getting into the lake, half of it comes from within Manitoba, the other half comes from everywhere else outside in the Lake Winnipeg watershed. But of that 50%, a huge chunk comes from agriculture. About a third of that amount comes from the city. So we cannot keep avoiding looking at what's going on with agriculture. It's a bit of a sacred cow in Manitoba because agriculture is a huge part of our history, our economy, and so on. But we got to figure out how to do it in ways that isn't going to be causing a problem. So what are we calling for? Well, you can't really read it. But basically, I'll tell you, what we're calling for is we need to phase out those industrial-style barns that use the liquid manure. We should really be asking for a moratorium on new construction of those kind of barns. Instead, they should be constructing barns that are using straw for the pigs, and they don't have thousands of animals. They can have hundreds of animals, perhaps a couple of barns with hundreds, but not thousands in one space. We're also asking that they change that regulation I told you about, where the 5 times as much manure as any crop, that needs to be changed. That is simply not sustainable. And so we need to work on getting them to change that. And finally, in order to persuade more hog producers to go, it's actually kind of an old-fashioned way, although I know lots of researchers don't like to use those words old-fashioned, but we're really talking about trying to encourage more back to the family farms where pigs are raised along with other animals, where they might have rotating crops, rotate pigs out on the pasture when they can. We need to have some education right now for that, and perhaps some financial incentives to get a few more people able to start in that. So that's what Hog Watch is all about. Here's just a few pictures of pigs being raised on straw. There's a few farms. I mean, there's far more farms than those 3 I've mentioned, but these pictures came from farms that are not too far away from Winnipeg. And in the summer, the pigs are out on helping to fertilize that particular patch of land, and then they're moved somewhere else. In the winter, they're in these hoop barns with lots of straw. And this is how pigs, I mean, if you want to be treating animals humanely, this is the way they should be treated, so that they can actually, root around with and live. If we're going to raise them for food, which is okay, but let's make sure we aren't causing them to suffer too much. At the same time as we could be really helping our environment. So what we're looking for is not only humane treatment of animals, but having water that's safe, swimmable, fishable, and it's possible. So if you are interested, I've just skimmed over everything because I know I didn't have very much time. Actually, there's another topic that you might want to ask somebody else to speak about, or at some point I could. The whole idea of human health antibiotic resistance. This is a major, major thing. In these industrial-style barns, the animals are routinely fed really tiny amounts of antibiotics in their food. It's called subtherapeutic, and that is to allow them to grow faster and to allow them to not get sick when they're in such close confinement. But if any of you know anything about antibiotic resistance, you probably have heard that the overuse of antibiotics is part of the problem. And in Canada, almost 80% of all antibiotic use goes to agricultural animals, as I just described. It doesn't go because there's one animal that's sick. It goes to the whole herd in order to keep them from, in order to allow them to keep living. Only about 20% is going to humans. And this is something that is not discussed very much, but you can actually find it on the on Canadian government website. You know, they're trying to start more control of this. Anyway, I think I'm probably pretty close to my time. And so, if you want to learn how to do if you're concerned about this, you can go to hogwatchmanitoba.ca. We have a lot more information. We're planning, in conjunction with the Humane Society, in several months to do an event about the antibiotic resistance issue. But also, I started something called Save Lake Winnipeg Project, and I wrote a blog. I haven't been writing it recently, but there's a lot of tidbits of information on that. So anyway, thanks so much for listening, and if anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer.
Questions? Yes, Ruby?
I just wanted to ask about how you said there's 5 times more that you're going to one piece of land than it actually needs. What would happen if it becomes just enough manure? What would happen to the rest of the manure? Is there a solution to what can be done with it, or?
Well, it needs to be spread over more land, but because this liquid manure is so heavy, they don't want to pay to transport it very far. If we were able to spread it over all of, half of Manitoba, it would be much less of a problem. I think that the bottom line is we probably cannot produce as many pigs, but I don't know. I hope that there will be some more interest from the university to do some research about that.
Why did the hog production jump so much in such a short time?
Because there's some history related to a change in the crow rate about transport of grain. I don't know if anybody else knows very much about that, and I should know more, but I don't. Anyway, the bottom line is Maple Leaf wanted to come here and open that big new slaughterhouse in Brandon. But in order to do that, they had to sort of be guaranteed that they would receive a minimum number of pigs that were all consistently kind of the same size and so on. So it really, that's when they got rid of something called single desk selling for hog producers and went to this system of Maple Leaf, and now it's Maple Leaf and High Life are the two main corporations. And so it put a lot of family farmers out of business because they couldn't produce the numbers of pigs that they needed these huge barns to produce those number of pigs.
Vicki, first off, thank you for being here. I knew a little bit about this. I know a lot more now. Are the politicians afraid to do anything? Are these big corporations just dictating everything that's happening? We're destroying our own lake, for God's sakes.
Well,
Put you on the spot, but.
no, I think corporate industrial agriculture is a massive, massive force in the world. Probably lots of you already know about this. It's really hard to get governments to do anything that would dissuade them from being here. But I don't know, I think changes are going to have to come because, you know, for example, the slaughterhouses and some of the barns, local people don't want to work in them because it's such, you know, really, really tough, unpleasant work, and so they bring in these temporary foreign workers. But now there's going to be there's about a bunch of cutback to that. So I don't know who's actually gonna. I don't know. Anyway, I think it's that it's all tied to this idea that it's about the economy, and if we. But what we don't see is how much of that money that is made in the hog industry stays in Manitoba. Now we don't have any locally owned, you know, High Life is owned by owners in Japan and Taiwan. It used to be a Manitoba family. Maple Leaf is still owned by McCain, but they're, I think, decreasing their interest in, they're moving more towards plant-based stuff, so. Yes, well, we have a former politician here, don't we? Maybe you can tell
A
us.
couple of them.
Yeah.
My question is, I mean, pig farming is a worldwide phenomenon, right? I mean,
Yes.
China, France, wherever pork is consumed, and far beyond that. So surely there must be some kind of experimentation going on that can make use of this waste product in some productive way, like energy generation. Is there anything in Manitoba that is on the cutting edge of it?
I'm not aware of anything, but to be honest, I'm not the right person really to talk to about that because I don't believe that we should be treating the animals this way. They need to be raised on straw. They need to have something to root in. Whenever you stop an animal, or human really, from being able to fulfill their instinctive needs, it causes chronic suffering. And so I'm just not in favor of raising animals where we're causing them to have chronic suffering. I just don't.
It's a great argument, certainly, for being vegan.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I mean, I know lots of people who actually have made a big effort to be in touch with family farms, and if they want to continue eating meat, they buy their meat from those farms. Like I am vegetarian, and Chris, my friend, is vegan, but you don't have to be. To care about this, you don't have to be. You can definitely find sources of meat that's much more ethical. And just another point is, in the European Union, like Canada is way far behind in terms of both our environmental and our animal welfare regulations. That's why we're having a lot of producers coming, for example, from the Netherlands, because we don't have manure police there. They have manure police. I mean, there probably are better ways of doing what we're doing here, if you really pay attention, but there's no enforcement here. You know, the previous government cut back a lot on even conservation officers. We've seen articles in the paper about that, and so, you know, there's rules like you're not supposed to spread manure when it's raining. But one of our Hog Watch members actually took photographs of the producers spreading in the rain and contacted conservation, and the conservation officer got back to him 3 weeks later and said, yes, you're right. I was too busy, but I visited 2 weeks later and I saw evidence of manure in the ditches, so yeah. But, you know, were they given a fine or anything? No, they were given a warning. So there's kind of a hands-off approach. But I think in more developed areas around the world, I mean, we are one of the most developed, but we're not when it comes to paying attention to animal welfare. The European Union has banned gestation stalls. Britain has stopped having gestation stalls probably for 25 years already. And we just allow our producers, they were supposed to get rid of them by 2024, but they didn't want to, and so they said, okay, well, maybe we'll do it by 2029. And this arrangement was giving them more than 10 years to change. So it's a big battle, but there are quite a few people who care about this. And if you live in the country and you are living near these barns, it's really bad. I mean, does anybody around here have any experience with that or know about it? No.
If you're going to open up a barn, what are the regulations like? I mean, isn't there, rules?
Yes.
In a barn? And what about people that have a farm already? Do they allow a farm to be built half a mile away from their house?
If you are going to build a barn that accommodates more than what is 300 animal units, then you have to get what's called a conditional permit. But 300 animal units doesn't mean 300 animals. It's kind of a mathematical thing. It could mean, 500 sows and their offspring. Anyway, the bottom line is, yes, you have to go for a conditional use permit unless you're just going to start a small farm. And then the government has a technical review committee, and they come in and review a whole bunch of things, and they make it a meeting for the public to give their opinion. But we've been involved in several of these meetings, honestly, where there's been maybe 45 or 50 people from the community presenting why they don't want it to happen, why they are concerned, but it still goes ahead. Now, I'll just give you one quick example, because I know that we're running out of time, but there's an organization called Top Pigs from the Netherlands that wanted to build a new kind of a research barn for genetics. And they chose a site around Lewis, Manitoba. This was at least 3 or 4. Oops. Is this cutting me off? Here it is. Anyway, they chose a site around Lewis, Manitoba. Watch heard about it, and we tried to help some people get organized and so on. And that's one that I actually made a very brief little presentation at. But there were at least, I think, 45 or 50 presentations against it. But the rural municipality still approved it. And within about a week or two of it being approved, it came out in the news that both the federal and the provincial government had already agreed to give a grant of $2 million to Top Pigs to settle, to do their barn here instead of somewhere else. So all those local citizens were like, well, it was a done deal. I mean, having that community hearing was kind of a sham. I mean, the previous government took away some of the rights of local communities to manage things. They created a municipal board that, would override sometimes decisions and so on. So it's very frustrating and I know people who actually built a house. There was a closed down barn, half a mile from them. When they built, they presumed it was never going to be operational, and one day it was operational, and they've just had horrendous stench problems, and there's nothing that can be done about it. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you very much.